Our heroine knew that she had been too lucky lately. The villagers perked up when they heard that the lord of the province was going to visit them. Like yesterday, the girl had a lot of work today. When she entered the shop, she saw that they were waiting for her. She thought that by working hard she could make a good life. So she took the packaged goods from the store and carried them through the streets, holding them tightly. The girl was glad to move to this place where it was cold all year round. Carts and carriages passed by. Life here was measured and quiet. Suddenly, familiar children's voices shouted, "Mom!" She began to look around in search of children. Soon she saw Finn and Luca in the crowd, waving their hands at her happily. Auntie Gelda was with them, carrying the baby on her back. This day was supposed to be one of the few. The boys happily ran to our heroine, not seeing anything around. Suddenly, a woman screamed loudly. Horror was in her eyes. She tried unsuccessfully to stop the danger that threatened the children. The boy ran without seeing anything around him. Then he knocked down a man carrying logs. The firewood flew noisily in all directions and fell with a crash. The horse that stood waiting for the rider got scared. The noble animal broke free from the reins and reared up, mad with fear. A threat arose from his hooves. Our heroine covered both frightened boys with herself. The kids huddled close to the one they had called their mother for as long as they could remember. The girl couldn't understand at what point everything went wrong. A moment later, a man in a cloak and armor with a bloody sword stood over the horse's body. Probably everything changed in her life the moment she met that man. A blond man with light eyes. His face and armor were stained with horseblood. Our heroine stuttered and thanked him for saving her. And bowing her head low before the gentleman, she assured him that she would repay his kindness. The man smiled and asked if she had really called his horse's death kindness. He ordered the father of these children to be brought to him. He wanted to make him pay the price for his horse. The girl raised her anxious gaze to the gentleman. She began to assure him that in the absence of such, she was ready to pay back herself. But the interlocutor believed that the woman would not be able to return such a price. Now, after some time, the girl asked herself if maybe she had aroused the gentleman's interest at that moment. But then she assured him that she would do everything in her power to repay him. The savior's eyes flashed and he ordered her to come to him at the Voledor Castle that night. In the evening, our heroine put the children to bed. Aunt Gelda said that she raised the girl as her own daughter, and she forbade her to go God knows where, considering it madness. She wiped the tears from the older woman's face and assured her that she had to pay such a price for the lives of her children, and there was no other way to repay that debt. The heroine of our story lived in Geneva, which was on the border of the Ringer Empire. The carriage was driven along a forest road, accompanied by a pair of knights. At this time, the girl was heading to the estate of Lord Geneva, to the castle of the Marquis of Morenhetze, Voledor, the grandson of the brave Red Lion who was the heroic founder of the Ringer Empire, Bolt Morenhotz, and as if to prove his origin, he himself achieved many military victories, and was revered as the reincarnation of a lion. But all the aristocrats were of course the same. Soon the girl saw a lonely castle, the windows of which were cozy and glowing with a soft light. The butler entered with a report to the gentleman. Bowing his head, he conveyed the widow's words that she was almost ready. Soon the door creaked open. A young lady with loose hair stood in a dressing gown, timid and trembling all over. The owner of the estate asked why she was trembling so. He was surprised that the promise had been made so confidently, but it turned out that she had not expected anything like that. The gentleman approached the girl. She turned her head away and assured him that she was shivering from the cold. The young man threw a cape he had taken off his shoulders onto the guest's shoulders. He concluded from the voice that it was the same woman from the market, and he was surprised that she, knowing his personality, behaved like that. The young lady was shy, but did not lower her gaze. Our heroine said that she knew who the gentleman was, that before her was Lord Geneva, Marquis of Morenhuitz. The gentleman was surprised at the courage of the girl, who jumped under a raging horse, saving children. And knowing his personality, she promised to do anything. The Marquis spoke of great maternal love with a mocking laugh. The girl did not respond to that, but after a pause, she looked him straight in the eyes and assured him that even if he were anyone, she would still give that promise to anyone who would save her children. The Marquis flinched at these words and his face changed. It seemed as if a chill blew from him. The man said that in that case she knew what she should do as a woman who entered a man's room dressed like that. Morenheit suggested that the girl leave if she was afraid, but she clutched her cloak to her chest and declared her determination to repay the debt. Soon the warm cape rustled and fell to the floor. The gentleman pushed the timid guest onto the bed and declared his readiness to begin. Early in the morning, our heroine saw snow-covered mountains in the distance through the window. Light snowflakes flew by, carried away by the wind. The Marquis asked if the girl had woken up, and he wanted to get an intelligible answer from her, and he asked how he could have become the first man Claire spent the night with. Morinheights took the girl by the chin and looked into her eyes. He was overcome by doubts that someone had hired her to deliberately get close to him. But the young lady remained silent. Then the Marquis brought his face closer to her and asked whether he needed to get closer to her again in order to get an intelligible answer. The gentleman advised the girl to tell everything before he gnawed through her thin, graceful neck. His hand tightened threateningly on the young lady's body. The Marquis asked why her body was still innocent. She asked him to stop and assured him that she had not lied at all. The girl insisted that the gentleman had drawn his own conclusions, and she had no intention of deceiving anyone. Even though they were not born by her, those babies were her children, and she asked the respected gentleman to move away from her face and get off her. The Marquis was taken aback by the commoner's pressure and boldness. Our heroine wrapped herself more tightly in the blanket, and Morinheight stood next to her, ready to listen. The fire crackled rhythmically in the fireplace, giving warmth. The gentleman wanted to know who the real mother of the 3 children was, and he insisted that it was better to tell the truth right away for the sake of herself and her children. The girl insisted that her brother's wife was their mother, but she died after giving birth to Rudy, the youngest. She told me that her brother had left on the merchant ship Puizen before his youngest child was born, and since then, there had been no contact with him. It turned out that the eldest boy was barely 5, the second 3. They were too young to comprehend the death of their parents, so they considered their aunt their mother. The Marquis concluded that Claire was posing as a widow, although she herself was still innocent. She confirmed it, and justified herself by saying that the children needed a mother. The girl pulled her robe tighter around herself and clenched her fist. She assured him that it was safer for her that way. Morinheights looked at his guest thoughtfully. He realized that the young lady would indeed have to work. After all, she didn't even know if her brother was alive, and perhaps it was indeed easier for the girl to pretend to be a widow than unmarried. After all, men could start hunting for her. Leaning towards Claire, the Marquis assured her that he had heard everything he wanted. Therefore, she wanted to return to their business. The girl asked what he wanted to say. The Marquis recalled that Claire had previously assured that she would enter anyone's room if it were necessary. Supporting the guest, the gentleman laid her on her back. The man bit the girl on the shoulder and ordered her to remember that it was not anyone with her that night, but Bolt Morinheights. The fire crackled merrily in the fireplace. The warmth spread throughout the Marquis's room. At this time, Morinheights himself took off his soft robe and dressed in everyday clothes. The girl pulled the blanket higher on herself. The Marquis was buttoning his collar. He called out to Claire. The girl apologized for disturbing the gentleman's rest and asked permission to leave right now. The gentleman answered without turning to face her. He stated that she and her family should remain in Castle Voledor until the snow on the mountain melted in a year. Claire perked up like a bird. Morinheights announced that he had decided to set a price that the girl would have to pay. Our heroine, shaking, crumpled the sheet with her hand. She realized that the Marquis did not intend to finish everything that night. Soon the master walked along the corridors of his castle on the red carpet. The servants respectfully bowed their heads in greeting at the master's wine. He reflected that Geneva's only resource was human labor, so it was only natural that the girl would pay with her body for his loss. It seemed that the Marquis was reassuring himself that he had taken Claire to his bed as payment for the death of his beloved horse. Then the Marquis stood with his sword in blood. But now, seeing the rebelliousness that the girl so skillfully hid under the mask of submission, he unexpectedly for himself could not remain calm. Morinheights remembered her bold words, almost a command to move away from her face and get off her, not forgetting to show respect in the same phrase. He chuckled in thought. He thought that he had only experienced such pleasure on the battlefield, and now he could not believe that in bed with a simple widow he could feel such a thing. Unable to answer himself what had happened to him, the Marquis called it all absurd. He turned around and walked away through the long corridors. The day was clear and fine. 2 small children were playing in the yard in front of the outbuilding. They were having fun pretending to fight, and in the building itself there were 2 women. The older one was packing things. Claire was sitting next to the baby in diapers. They had a lot of things to do. Our heroine sat with a hot water bottle pressed to her stomach. She reached for the box with things, unable to resist fussing over them too. But Aunt Gelda ordered her not to move, and told the girl to sit still without removing the warmth from her stomach. She assured that she was fine. But the woman, wise with years of life, did not believe that a bear spent the night with a weak girl, and she cursed him, that somehow he realized all the beauty of Claire. The sobbing aunt ordered her to be a good girl, to rest and not to upset her. Claire believed that they would live better there than here anyway. The older woman could not believe it. The young lady insisted that she didn't even remember her mother's voice, and only thanks to her aunt did she know how to be a good mother. She hoped that she understood everything. She was amusing the baby in her arms, and she was sure that the Marquis would not starve the girl he had spent the previous night with. Tet was dumbfounded by such words, and the girl continued to boast that it was a great deal for her. Gelda's patience ran out. She was indignant at how an unmarried girl could talk such vulgar things. She believed that if her mother were alive, she would have pulled Claire's hair. Her scream could be heard through the door when someone approached her. The aunt continued to rage, and blamed Endon for everything, that he dared to leave his children with his sister and disappear. Then there was a knock on their door. Our heroine approached the exit of her modest dwelling, wondering who was there. The hinges creaked, opening the door. A young man in armor stood behind the threshold. He introduced himself as a knight of the Teutonic Order, and his name was Julian Crom. He assured that he had come by order of the Marquis of Morinheights, and had been appointed to escort Lady Claire back to her master's castle. The locals couldn't believe that a Teutonic knight of the order had come all this way to escort a widow. It turned out that the rumors were true. A simple-looking carriage rolled along a forest path. The noble animals quickly pulled the harness, urged on by the shouts of the coachman. Our heroine glanced out the window from time to time at the flickering landscapes. She felt a little sick and felt sleepy. Somehow Claire was sure that everything would be fine. Her eyelids grew heavy and she fell into a light sleep. Soon the Marquise's estate came into view. The massive structure looked majestic against the backdrop of snowy mountains. The carriage, accompanied by knights, stopped not far away, almost reaching the main entrance to the Marquise's castle. The carriage stopped at a small 2-story building. Majestic mountains towered over this cozy place. Our heroes, one by one, got out of the carriage. Finn was glad to be free. Auntie began to reprimand the boy. Claire looked around. She covered her face with her hand. A bright ray of sunlight hit her eyes. Auntie Gelda continued to scold the fidget. The girl admired the surroundings. Not far away, on a hill, she saw the majestic castle of the Marquis of Morinheights. Lord Genevieve sat at the oak desk in his office. The sun's rays were streaming through the windows. A stately, dark-haired man stood before the gentleman. The brunette put his hand to his chest in a welcoming gesture and introduced himself as Count Schweiwen. He admitted that he had learned that the gentleman had brought a woman to the heir's tower. The Marquis tensed up. The young nobleman looked at his opponent closely. The lord had nothing more to add to what his interlocutor already knew. Schweiwen reported that after the death of the master's mother, Lady Oberta, this place had no owner. He suggested, to begin with, finding someone for this position. Perhaps it would be better that way. The Marquis rose from his seat. His fingers dug into the carved back of the chair. The furniture creaked quietly in protest. He would have liked to, but... The interlocutors stood opposite each other. Lord Genevieve asked what kind of woman, in Count Schweiven's opinion, could meet his requirements. The Emperor worked day and night to get an heir. Should the Marquis pray that he has a princess? The Count shuddered at these words. The brunette expressed confidence that he was not the only one who wanted Lord Geneva to become the ruler of this empire. The Marquise's gaze froze as if time had stopped. The meaning of the words he had heard about the ruler of the empire slowly penetrated his consciousness. He repeated the Count's words. About 20 years ago, when the first Emperor Riggan, who united the empire, passed away, the political arena was divided into 3 factions. The capital is Halpen, where Emperor Kilveric resided. The Duchy of Puisan is ruled by his brother, Archduke Edwin, and the Marquisate of Geneva, ruled by Riggan's friend, Nurberk Morinheights. The Count threw up his hands. He honestly admitted that the current Emperor and Archduke were incapable of governing the empire. The Marquis thought about it. Well, that made sense. After all, these 2 titled men had even sent away their younger sister, because they felt threatened by her. In the absence of the princess, the only heirs of Ringen were the Emperor, the Archduke, and the Archduke's only daughter, Lady Brodie. The atmosphere in the office was tense. The Count voiced his thoughts that the Empire was on the verge of collapse. They could no longer rely on Kilverick and Edwin. A heavy silence hung in the air as the Marquis cut off his interlocutor's speech with one commanding shout. He looked closely at Count Schweiwen and remarked that if this was his true desire, he would have to be careful with his words. The brunette coughed into his fist and apologized. He bowed his head in agreement. The Marquis looked out the window. The Count reminded him that there was very little time left before the Lord's departure to Poissy. And so, as a faithful servant, he showed impatience. The man believed that Lord Geneve was aware of the Archduke's intentions to arrange an engagement with Lady Brodie this time. So until that happened, the Marquis continued to look out the window in silence. Below he saw a carriage passing by on the gravel path. He chuckled to himself and told Count Schweiwen that that was enough for today. Women with children looked at the huge room. The kids admired the size. The ladies were more reserved in their emotions. Every detail of the house, every little thing was thought out. The house had a stove and firewood, and neatly made beds gave this home a cozy atmosphere. Claire was delighted. She was happy. They wouldn't have to worry about the children catching a cold. Auntie watched the girl carefully. Suddenly, a general of the knightly order entered the house. The man respectfully placed his hand on his chest. He said that her family would be living here. The general pointed through the high window at a gloomy tower that loomed in the distance. He informed Lady Claire that she would live in that tower. Alone. The girl's gaze slid over the majestic building. Bitter irony flashed through her thoughts about the Marquis's refined taste. The girl's gaze darted to her interlocutor. Confusion was reflected in her features. The words about the Marquis and what he expected sounded like a sentence. The aunt immediately became indignant. She asked them to wait. They had just arrived. Her ward calmed the woman down. She assured her that everything was fine. Claire squatted down in front of the two little ones. She looked at the children sternly. She explained that they should wash up and go to bed before their mother returned. She jokingly threatened that whoever went to bed late would have to eat 2 bowls of spinach soup. Every step she took next to General Julian was taking her further away from her family. The girl realized that the distance was greater than she thought. It would be harder to escape. The heavy gate swung open with a long creaking sound. The cold fireplace and neglected furnishings created an oppressive atmosphere of abandonment. In the back of the room, like a shadow among shadows, loomed the figure of Lord Genevois, arms folded across his chest, radiating the same intimidating aura as everyone else. Rumors of his unrivaled skill with the ball echoed in her memory. Claire's gaze involuntarily lingered on his imposing figure. For a man who had won fame in battle, he was quite handsome. And of course he had a scary side. The Marquis asked if she was happy with her new home. Claire admitted that it was more than she deserved. Therefore, she did not even know how to thank him. The man squeezed the girl's thin wrist in his hand. He was glad to hear it. The Lord hoped to give the girl what she wanted most. The gentleman pulled the girl towards him. He ingratiatingly asked her what she thought he had given her. He leaned toward the girl. Their faces were close to each other. Claire timidly suggested that it was safety. The Lord asked why she thought so. The girl remembered her escort, and explained that he had sent the Teutonic Knight's order for her, and warned everyone not to touch her. She closed her eyes. She remembered how the people in the settlement around her had condemned her. She understood that when the children grew up, they might not be able to stay in the village. Claire sincerely thanked the gentleman. With his help, her family and she will be able to live in the safest place in Geneva. The man grinned. He pulled the young lady towards him sharply. The girl tried to resist. A moment later, Claire was lying on the cold floor of the abandoned room, the Lord hovering over her. He slowly pulled off his shirt. He told the girl that her debt had now become bigger. Therefore, she should work harder to pay it off. The young lady blushed at his words. She pressed her hand to her face. The girl did not take her eyes off the face of the Marquis of Morinhuitz. She felt the touch of a man's hands on her skin. Bolt was sure that he had already taught the girl how she could repay him. Bright rays of sunlight flooded the room through the high windows. The quiet rustle of sheets broke the morning silence. Claire basked in the embrace of the cozy bed. Every touch of the pillow brought bliss. Suddenly the young lady realized that she was lying in a soft bed. This pulled her out of her slumber and made her sit up abruptly. She was not fully awake yet and did not understand what this place was. A sharp pain pierced her torso as the girl began to rise from the bed. The memory of the previous night echoed with pain throughout her body. It reminded her of the moment when darkness mercifully swallowed her consciousness. There was a knock at the door. A young man entered the room. It was the castle butler. His name was Jake. He asked the girl how she was feeling. The man said that as long as Claire remained in the tower, she could contact him if she needed anything. The girl asked how soon she would have to start her new duties. What day would her work begin? The butler did not understand what Claire was talking about. The young lady doubtfully tried to clarify her duties in the tower. She could start sewing and tanning leather right away without training. She promised to work hard, no matter what the butler ordered her to do. The man tried to interrupt the flow of words, but Claire admitted that she was useless in the kitchen. She would be grateful if she was assigned to do the laundry instead of cooking. Jake explained that they couldn't allow the lady who served their master to do such menial work. Claire looked at the man with bewilderment. She chuckled nervously. She mentally repeated the phrase about the lady who serves their master. She remembered the body hanging over her. Could what the Lord had been doing to her for the last 2 days be called service? The butler politely informed Claire that she could go for a walk if she wished. But there was a strict rule. She was not allowed to invite anyone into the tower. The exhausted girl returned to the embrace of the soft bed. She asked the butler to leave. She noted his respectful attitude towards her as a hostess. Jack briefly agreed and left. The door closed. The room was plunged into silence. Only the soft sounds of crackling logs in the fireplace remained. The girl stretched out blissfully on the soft bed. She remembered the last time she had her own separate bed. Claire glanced at her arm. Dark bruises covered the soft skin. These marks were silent proof that the events of the previous night had not been a dream. As she settled herself comfortably on the bed, the girl thought that she had earned this luxury. For putting up with such a rude man, it was a fair deal. The young lady felt awkward. She snorted. If Eden had seen her, he would have laughed. He could have reproached her for playing on pity. The brother accused Claire of being two-faced. He believed that the girl was only pretending to be weak. He believed that he knew how cold-blooded she was. She mentally agreed with this statement. Survival had made her cold-blooded. Claire no longer denied it. This was her reality. She could just rest and sleep. For the first time in a long time, the girl had such an opportunity. And later she would spend some time with the children. Claire's eyes warmed at the thought of simple joys. Sharing delicious food with the little ones was what she dreamed of at that moment. The young lady finally fell into a deep sleep, hugging a soft pillow. Her breathing became even and calm. A slight smile appeared on her lips. The door closed behind Jake with a soft click. He walked slowly down the hallway, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The butler knew the Marquise's character. A routine trip to the village to check supplies ended unexpectedly. The Lord returned covered in blood. Jake came out to meet the master. The Marquis and the knights were discussing the deed of some brave woman. Her desperate throw under the horse's hooves amazed everyone. The Marquis intended to visit the sauna. The knight behind him noticed that the young widow looked attractive. She would quickly find a patron. Max asked what the Lord had said to the young woman. The knight noticed that she was upset after their conversation. The Marquis looked coldly at the young man. He rudely ordered him to be silent. The knight froze in bewilderment. Max insisted on his right to know the truth about the master. He also mentioned Jake's right. The butler asked not to involve him in this. Jake taught them how to get a woman. The armored leg crashed down on defenseless flesh. The blow to the limb sent the knight reeling. A sharp pain shot through Max's leg. He pointed out the force of Bolt's blow with reproach. He reproached the Marquis for being too cruel to his friend. Jake noted that it was worth respecting the Lord. The captain accused the butler of blind loyalty. The Marquis had recently been forced to kill his favorite horse. Max spoke out about the Lord's supposed composure, calling him a petty boor. The Lord cut him off. He ordered the woman to be brought. The knight, with distrust in his voice, asked again about the woman. Was it really the Marquis who was talking about that widow? Lord Geneva gave the order. The butler bowed, accepting the order to escort the guest to the master's chambers. The man thought. Bolt had not only brought a woman to the castle, he had also settled her in the heir's tower. The man noted that there was something extraordinary about the young woman. The commoner combined unusual calm and natural elegance. A tall stone tower rose against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains. Perhaps it was time for a change in the Marquise's life. At least that's what the butler thought. Doubts haunted him, forcing him to return to thoughts about the mysterious guest again and again. Since that day, the Lord never visited the tower. Claire asked the butler for help. She wanted to work in the castle. The man insisted that a lady who served her master should not do dirty work. Claire was desperate. She admitted that, judging by everything, the master had forgotten about her. so there shouldn't be any problems. Servants were whispering nearby. It looked like the girl had been abandoned. People laughed behind Claire's back. The woman had 3 children and she still didn't know how to seduce a man, and she wasn't as beautiful as the rumors said. Claire admitted that she owed the Marquis. 10 days of idleness weighed on her. The butler asked about the debt with surprise. She announced that in bed the Marquis had set a price for the lives of her children. Now he did not visit her, and the woman must find another way to repay him. The girl went in the direction where the bed linen was being dried today. The butler asked Lady Claire to wait. The young woman admitted that the Lord had been ignoring her and not giving her work. The butler should not have called her a lady. Jake felt awkward at the words. He tried to distract the girl. She could turn to him for any help, and the servants would take care of her. Claire repeated her request for work. The people of Geneva believed that all debts had to be paid, and even though the girl was not from here, she knew it. The Marquis was helping her family. If she didn't do something, he might suddenly kick them out before spring came. The girl couldn't let that happen. Claire stubbornly walked along the path. The butler tried to stop the girl. After all, she was not even going in the right direction. The clatter of hooves was heard behind them. A rider on horseback approached them. He asked the man to stop and stop calling the girl by name. Max irritably said that Jake had called Claire so many times that her ears might have dried out. The girl stopped and looked back at the speaker. With a smile, the captain asked who this Claire was that had made the butler so agitated. He asked the Marquis. Wasn't he interested in who this girl was? Lord Geneva stared at the young woman without blinking. The butler noticed that the gentleman was wearing armor. He respectfully inquired about the reason why the Marquis had put on armor today. Jake's question was answered by one of the knights. The guards went to the mountain and noticed the bear. The knights heard this and were now heading there. Claire stood not far from the riders. The Marquis did not even glance in her direction. The girl smiled mirthlessly. Bolt ignored her as if she were invisible. Max continued to question Jake about the woman next to him. Marquis Morinheights cut the knight off abruptly. Angrily shouted the order to leave. Claire ran after her master, her scream lost in the clatter of hooves as the rider headed toward the forest. The butler tried to stop the rebel. The girl's desperate voice echoed around the area. She needed to tell Lord Geneva something. Jake managed to grab the girl's hand. His voice sounded with genuine concern for Lady Claire. The man asked her to be careful. The butler jerked the girl towards himself. His hands closed on the young lady's thin waist. Jake explained his reasons for doing so. His gaze was fixed on the master's horse, which had almost touched the girl. Claire froze. The captain of the knights noted the gallant act of the butler. He noted the similarity between the situation with the horse and the woman. It sounded strangely familiar. Could it be that this person was the widow? Max barely recognized her. The woman looked much neater now. The captain had heard rumors that Bolt had placed her in the heir's tower. What a misfortune to be caught by such a man. The chance for a happy life was lost. Lord Geneva pulled the reins, stopping his horse. His displeased gaze fell on the girl. The order to return to the tower sounded rather sharp. Claire was puzzled. And why, in his opinion, was she here? She asked the Lord to let her work in the castle. On these conditions, she agreed to return. The Marquis gave the young lady an icy look. His order to return sounded cold and imperious. Claire looked up at the Marquis. She asked for a job at the castle if he didn't plan to visit her. She promised to repay his kindness. The Marquis turned to the butler. The man responded to his master's call with respect. The Lord had ordered the ignorant woman to be taught, to be told what would happen if she did not obey orders. Claire winced at the cruel words. The Marquis turned away and moved forward. His words sounded like a threat. If he ever saw her out of place. The man narrowed his eyes unkindly. With an ominous note in his voice, he promised to chop off Jake's hand. The knight captain quickly steered his horse towards the Lord. He noted that such a threat was unnecessary. The Marquis spurred his horse and rushed away. The knight tried to stop his headlong flight with a shout. Max turned around abruptly, puzzled again by the sudden change in the Marquis's demeanor. The butler and Claire stood in tense silence. The girl was filled with anger. In her mind, she called the Lord a bastard. The whole situation was throwing her off balance. Claire visited her relatives. The children were running around in the yard. Auntie was interested in what the handsome butler had said. Had he allowed her ward to work? The girl held Rudio in her arms. She explained that the butler could do nothing without the Marquis's permission. The aunt reacted with a flash of irritation. The people of the area sang praises of Lord Geneva. They thought he was special among the others. Auntie thought the Marquis would be better. But she was wrong. Gelda burst into a tirade of anger. She called the nobles dirty and identical. Claire gently reminded her of the presence of children nearby. She also mentioned that it was her choice. But her aunt sharply reminded her that she had been threatened. So what choice could we be talking about? Claire was musing on the grim fate of rebellious women in the Empire. The words about the possible consequences if the Marquis changed his mind hung in the air. The girl mentioned silver plates that could be asked from the butler. The aunt asked in bewilderment what plates Claire had in mind. If the Marquis changed his mind, they could sell them for money. Auntie sighed. The butler would never give her such plates voluntarily. The butler begged her to tell him anything she needed. So if she asked him for plates instead of work, he might agree. Gelda laughed sadly. She grumbled with discontent. The woman could not believe that they would live the life of beggars. The girl made a remark. Rudio could hear her rude words. The aunt was perplexed. How could this little creature understand anything she said? Claire reminded him that the little girl could understand everything. She said that Finn had learned his aunt's strong words before he could speak properly. The baby laughed softly, radiating carefree happiness. Claire called Auntie Gelda. The thick rope dug deeper and deeper into the huge bear's neck. The man cursed. He looked at the mighty beast, which continued to resist. The skin was so thick that it did not yield to the blows of their swords. The men shouted, demanding that the rope be tightened further to restrain the enraged beast. One of the knights reported several new bears. The air was filled with the growling of the beasts. The man began to run, leaving chaos and fear behind. With a long metallic ringing sound, the sword quickly left its scabbard. A heavy premonition of the inevitable hung in the air. The space was filled with the whistle of cutting weapons. The bears responded with a furious roar that made the earth tremble. Marquis Morinhites charged fearlessly into the thick of things, his blade flashing like lightning. Cheers erupted from all around. Their master had arrived. People walked around the battlefield in horror, where a fight had recently raged. Mutilated carcasses of bears lay on the ground. The knight looked around the battlefield. He shook his head. If they wanted to move the carcasses before sunset, they would need to call in more men. Lord Genevieve let out a sharp breath. He scratched his bloody head. The man's clothes and armor were also covered in blood. With a metallic clang, the lord sheathed his sword. He gave Max instructions to take care of everything, and quickly walked away. The question was heard as to where he was going. The Marquis cut the knight off abruptly, saying that it was none of his business. The knight noticed that lately the lord had begun to disappear somewhere after each hunt. Most likely it was because the blood was getting on his famous sword, Ascaron, and he needed a place to calm down. The sun's rays played on the blade of the ball. The blue cloak was carelessly thrown off. The soft splashes of water broke the silence. A warhorse peacefully nibbled the grass nearby. The man stood knee-deep in water. His naked torso glistened in the sun. Every muscle in his strong body was chiseled as if from marble. Strong arms cut through the water's surface, scattered silvery splashes in the air. The water's surface rippled from his movement, breaking the silence of the forest. Drops of water slid down his manly face, falling into the pond. The man's quiet exhalation was filled with fatigue. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. A painful thirst tormented him, finding no satiation. Blood stained the water brown. Bolt thought that perhaps he was better suited to remain on the battlefield than to follow in his father's footsteps. A dark grin twisted his face. Ascaron's bloodlust was eternal. At this rate, he really could go mad. To satisfy it, he must take part in battles on the battlefield or... The memory of the young widow pierced his consciousness. The body froze as the man remembered how his butler had stopped Lady Claire from doing something rash. Saved her from a horse. He remembered the girl's ultimatum about allowing him to work in the castle. He suddenly decided that she was flirting with another man for this reason. A cold smile played on the Marquise's lips. She had only spent a couple of days alone and was already demonstrating how much she missed a man in her bed. Since she was so desperate to be in bed again, the lord thought he might as well visit her one more time. He pulled on the reins of his warhorse. Bolt rode slowly, swaying in the saddle. He thought about how it cost him nothing to embrace a woman who meant nothing to him. With an anticipatory grin, the man spurred his horse. The Marquis was returning to Voledor. The sun's rays flooded the courtyard where children frolicked carefree. Soft light danced in the windows of the mansion, filling it with warmth and life. The aunt was feeding the baby. Claire tried to intervene and help, but was met with a sharp refusal. Gelda was not doing anything, so she could do it herself. The girl objected that before arriving at the castle, Her aunt had been constantly grumbling about how she wanted to rest. But the woman admitted that idleness weighed on her soul. With a thoughtful expression on her face, the girl reminded her aunt that the servants had recently allowed her to join them in milking the cows. The woman pursed her lips in annoyance. It was only because the servants were interested in Claire. For every drop of milk they milked, they asked 3 questions. The little girl reached out to the girl, smiling. Claire wondered what they were so interested in. Auntie was angry. The answer was too obvious. The young lady took the baby in her arms. The servants were worried about the fate of the children's father. How she had gained the favor of the Marquis, and how the girl had lost it so quickly. The woman was angry. They should all mind their own business. Claire laughed. She could imagine how her aunt would react. The girl was glad that there were people here, that they were kind to Finn and Luca, and that the boys could play with children their own age. Aunt reproached. If Claire was so worried about them, then why did she disappear as soon as she returned to the tower? She was interested in how she spent her days there. The girl chuckled sadly. Her huge eyes filled with sadness. She didn't do anything special there. But she started telling how she spent her time cleaning the tower. There was dust everywhere, perhaps because the tower had been empty for a long time. The silence was broken only by the sounds of her footsteps. The girl chatted non-stop. She lit the fireplaces on each floor every morning. At the same time, she aired out all the rooms, and also shook out the blankets. The women stood opposite each other at the window. Claire held the baby in her arms. She said she was exploring one floor after another, starting with the first. I found a fairly large library on the 3rd floor. Tall shelves filled the space. Old books were covered in a thick layer of dust. Auntie noted Claire's busy schedule all this time. The girl responded with a smile. Today she planned to climb to the top of the tower. The woman nodded approvingly. She was pleased with the life of a ward. It seemed that Claire was doing well. Gelda was lost in thought. She was thinking about Claire's hardships, about how quickly she had to grow up. The ward's question brought her back to reality. They sat at the set table and Claire told her that she had found a ladder yesterday. In her aunt's eyes, the girl would still remain a baby. The sun was rolling behind the horizon. Majestic mountain peaks towered against the sunset sky. Snow covered their tops. Claire left the castle gates. Her aunt caught up with her and asked if the girl had returned to the tower again today. But the girl asked not to follow her. The woman reminded him that the nobleman had not returned after the first day. She suggested that they spend the night there. But Claire did not want to give the lord any reason to reproach her. She admitted that the Marquis had seen her today, so perhaps this meeting would remind him to visit the girl tonight. Auntie was alarmed. Was it worth saying that? But Claire had already turned around, dropped a remark that she would return, and headed for the tower. It was getting dark. The girl walked and thought about her aunt's words. She guessed what she meant. The words were more shameful than any curse. Claire constantly heard whispers behind her back, and the reason the people of the castle did not talk to her was because of her. People judged and discussed her. They spoke of her as a woman who served their master. The girl clenched her hands into fists in anger. A woman who gave her body to a man with power. That's what everyone thought of her now. But the girl didn't care about the gossip. They had to leave this place when spring came. Claire understood that she just had to wait for the appointed time. The sky was ablaze with orange light. The clouds were tinted purple. The tower rose against the sunset. The castle in the distance was drowned in fog. The young woman walked slowly along the path. She was thinking. Her steps echoed in the echoing silence of the forest. Suddenly, Claire froze in place. Her huge eyes stared into the distance. Her face expressed surprise. The girl froze before the majestic view. The evening glow painted the mountains purple and gold. The snowy peaks shone in the last rays. The heart beat faster at the sight of the sunset. The girl imagined what this beauty looked like from the top of the tower. The mountains continued to bathe in golden light. Claire walked quickly up the marble staircase. The sunset rays were shining through the narrow windows. Her silhouette was bathed in soft light. The steps led higher and higher. It reminded her of a moment in a book she had loved when she was young. A golden-haired man met a red-haired girl at sunset. The sky was ablaze with the same fire. Our heroine had already reached the ladder that led up. She remembered her favorite moment from this book. Claire walked up to the open space at the top of the tower. The words from the book about the lovers came to mind. They vowed to be together even after death. The sky turned crimson. The girl froze in place. Lord Geneva's dark figure stood out against the sunset. A gloomy silence hung in the air. The man was silent. Claire couldn't understand the reason for his presence. Her thoughts were confused. The reason for his visit flashed through her mind. Had the Marquis come here to watch the sunset like her? The Lord's heavy gaze was cold. The reminder of the threat to the butler, Jake, pierced Claire's heart. Her hands trembled. The sky darkened. The shadows thickened. The young lady froze in indecision. Fear paralyzed her movements. She hoped that she was still allowed to be here. The Marquis noted sparingly that the girl was quite fast. Claire froze under his gaze. The shadows stopped thicker. The young lady curtsied deeply. Her timid excuses sounded softly in the evening air. The girl was unaware of the Marquis's presence on the tower. The Lord chuckled at the obvious ignorance. The girl's haste betrayed her desire to be on the tower. The twilight began to envelop the platform. Claire clenched her teeth until they hurt. The man was so dazzling against the red sky that she wanted to look away. The Marquis was incredibly arrogant. He said that she should not wander around the castle unnecessarily. For Claire, this man was the cause of misfortune. She turned to Bolt. Admitted her attempts to pay off the debt. The answer sounded harsh. The girl must pay him back when and with what he demands. The young woman specifically confessed her desire to find another way to pay if the man no longer desired her. The Marquis frowned. The shadows thickened on his face. The girl stood before the Marquis looking down. His words sounded like a reproach. After all she had to do was wait. Was it really that difficult? Tears glistened in Claire's eyes. She asked how long she would have to wait if he hadn't arrived. The words echoed across the empty tower. Continued. The Lord locked her in the tower but did not visit. Turned her family into a laughing stock. So where is the guarantee that he will keep his promise to free them? The Lord replied whether he visited her, ignored her, or threw her out, she must wait obediently. Therefore it was necessary to remain in the tower as long as he wished. In the gloom, the wind ruffled Claire's hair. The girl gathered all her courage to admit that what if it was she who desired him? The Marquis frowned. He looked at the girl with incomprehension. His question sounded sharp in the silence of the night. Claire spoke her words with cold determination. She would not be his temporary toy. For every pain she caused, she would leave a scar on him in return. The young lady looked down. She asked what she should do if she wanted him, her master. The tension between them thickened like a thundercloud. The Marquis exhaled sharply, breaking the ringing silence. The words that the young lady needed a man to warm her bed made the girl tense up. Claire tried to hide her true feelings. The cold smile never left the Marquis's face. He continued to mock. Was the wood burning in the fireplace not enough to keep her warm? It had nothing to do with the fact that she was cold. The girl explained that she had no business. She had to support her family, which consisted of 4 people. Claire knew the year would fly by, and rest was not a luxury she could afford. They had to prepare for life outside the castle. The girl bowed respectfully. With a pleading voice, she asked for mercy and to allow her aunt and herself to work at the castle. It is necessary to prepare for when the man will not seek a meeting with her. They need to be able to live independently. Bolt was surprised by her desire. Claire confirmed that they would be penniless when it came time to leave the castle, and she didn't want to starve to death with her children. The Marquis laughed. He was amused by the girl's demand for work if he was not going to visit her every night. A cold smile played on Bolt's lips. Claire looked up. Even if the Lord was planning to visit her, it would be better if he let her work. The Marquis pulled the girl towards him with authority. His gaze was filled with undisguised desire. The air became thick with tension. The Lord approached the girl. His breath tickled her skin. The words about how to get what you want by pleasing a man hung in the air. The young lady froze. Claire tried to pull away. She asked the Marquis to stop. The man broke the embrace. He took a step back. He wiped his lips with a casual gesture. There was a mocking note in his voice. The man expressed doubt whether the girl was talented enough in this matter. The young lady glared at the Lord. The Marquis asked if her mother hadn't taught the girl what to do if she wanted to get something from a man. Claire said with sadness in her voice that she had never heard anything like that from her mother, who left this world immediately after her birth. The Lord looked at the girl intently. Not only had she taken care of her brother's 3 children and her aunt, but she had also grown up without knowing the face of her own mother. The man touched the girl's plump, tender lips. He advised her to invite himself to her bed if the girl wanted something. After all, this was the only place Claire could get anything from the master. Bolt pressed his lips to hers again in a passionate kiss. The sheet crumpled under his hand. The bed creaked rhythmically. Shadows slid along the walls as the night hid them under its cover. The Marquis exhaled sharply. The moonlight painted the room in cold tones. The silence of the night was broken only by the intermittent beating of two hearts. The young lady asked the Marquise to slow down a little. Her plea made the man freeze for a moment. The Marquis reminded her that her words had been different before. His voice was harsh. Claire shuddered at the coldness in his tone. Lord Geneva continued. Their bodies intertwined in an ancient dance of passion. The night hid their silhouettes. The sheets absorbed the heat of their bodies. Claire closed her eyes, letting the tears leave wet trails on her soft cheeks. The moonlight silvered her pale face while the shadows hid the rest. The Marquis inhaled her scent, which was like a fresh wind blowing from the mountains of Altas. This clean scent displaced the smell of blood as he watched her face. The man saw Claire from the top of the tower. He knew that she had not run to the top to see him, but nevertheless, he did not feel disappointed. He was tempted to punish the rebel for ignoring the warning, but her presence was enough to calm his irritation. The Lord was lost in memories of the first night he spent with Claire. It wasn't that bad, and when he went to bed alone afterwards, he was surprised by the feeling of a small tremor throughout his body. Despite this, he did not return to her because, well, perhaps because he did not understand the reason why he gave the girl this tower for just one night spent with him. The noble gentleman looked closely at his partner. He thought, could it be that this woman did not know her true position? He didn't believe that the girl was worried about her future after a night with him. And even if he hadn't visited her again, she would have received an impressive compensation. The man wondered whether she was being naive about the way the world worked, or whether Claire was trying to trick him. Thoughts circled in his head like crows over a battlefield. The darkness of the room reflected the darkness of his soul. He watched the fragile figure of the girl in the moonlight. The Marquis carefully tucked a disobedient lock of hair behind the girl's ear. Her name escaped his lips. The moonlight silvered everything around with a magical glow. Lord Geneva realized that he had never felt any feelings even for noble persons before. So why did he keep her, a commoner, close by? He admitted that Claire continued to bother him. The Marquis covered the girl's lips with his own, putting all his passion into the kiss. The Altus Peak stood out against the brightening sky, the snow sparkling in the first rays of dawn, painting the peaks a soft pink. The Marquis was buttoning his shirt. His movements were confident and precise. Claire was still asleep in the rumpled bed. Her hair was scattered across the white sheets. The man froze as he heard the door creak, his fingers stopping on the last button as he stood motionless in the morning silence. The Lord turned around. The butler greeted the master with a respectful bow. His figure radiated respect and readiness to serve. The Marquis noted Jake's early arrival. The butler offered to escort the Lord to his study. The quiet footsteps of the two men echoed off the walls of the corridor. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows. The Lord carefully examined the corridor as he walked. Everything around looked as if the girl had touched every corner here. The Marquis asked with delight if this was not amazing. The butler watched with amazement at his master's uncharacteristic behavior. Lord Genevo's last memories of this tower were filled with the smell of blood. He called on his butler to notice how everything had changed. Jake asked if the Lord would like him to tell Lady Claire to stop cleaning the tower. The Marquis waved his hand dismissively. It was the girl's choice. The Lord turned to the butler. He gave orders regarding the woman's aunt, instructing him to find her something to do. Jake, not catching the meaning, asked again with confusion. The young lord smirked. He noted the night had been well spent. His smugness was reflected in every movement. The butler bowed, understanding the gentleman's hint. The Marquis noted that in that case he could meet the girl halfway once. The butler's amazement knew no bounds. He froze in place. In all his years of service, this was the first time Jake had seen his master listen to anyone's pleas. The butler remembered the sweet Lady Claire. Was it possible that the Marquis had really changed this time? On the table lay a variety of exquisite decorations. They occupied almost the entire working surface. The facets of the stones flashed in the rays of light. The Marquis turned the pages of the book in irritation. The decorations displeased him so much that he demanded that Jake remove them from his sight. The butler folded his arms. He informed the gentleman of the impossibility of fulfilling the order. His pose expressed humility and firmness. The Lord tried to read the lines of the book. The butler's reminder about choosing a gift for the Archduke caused him a dull irritation. Jake was lost in thought about his duties. The absence of the castle's mistress was especially acute at such moments of decision-making. The butler showed off an elegant bracelet on scarlet velvet. The Marquis noted that such an extraordinary thing should be to the Archduke's taste. Lord Genevieve turned the page of the book. He approved the choice of decoration and ordered the gift to be wrapped. The butler respectfully responded with his consent. The servant drew his master's attention to the following ornaments which lay on the table. These he had prepared as gifts for Lady Brodie. The Marquis remained immersed in his reading. He did not raise his eyes from the pages. In an indifferent voice, he advised the butler to simply choose a horse. The man froze in surprise. The question of a horse as a gift hung in the air. The Marquis tore himself away from his book and advised Jake to choose an obedient but frisky one. The servant was perplexed. Did his master really want to send a horse instead of jewels to the only princess of the empire? What was he planning? Lord Genevieve's cold voice rang out in the study. He ordered the butler to pack up and send away all the other jewels too, never to be seen again. The jewelry box slammed shut with a soft click. The butler bowed respectfully to the master. He was about to take the chest away. The Marquis looked up from his book and called out to Jake, his gaze fixed on the magnificent necklace. He demanded that the ornament be left on his desk. The facets of the exquisite necklace of precious stones flashed and sparkled in the rays of light. The butler was confused. His face showed incomprehension. Then understanding came. He nodded his head in relief. The Marquis continued to study the pages of the book. Jake was surprised. After all, the gentleman showed no interest in decoration. Why did he choose this one? All this seemed strange even when the master ordered to find work for the girl's family. Something unusual had been happening to the Marquis lately. The man froze near the table. He held the chest of jewels in his hands and thought, could this necklace have any connection to the lady in the tower? Night was falling on the city. The girl stood at the arched doorway. Her silhouette was visible in the transparent glass of the windows. Claire walked up the marble stairs, the candle flame flickering in her hand. The day was slowly fading outside the windows. The fire cast strange shadows on the brick walls. The girl smiled. Auntie Gelda looked so excited. Claire couldn't believe that her aunt had been given a job. To be honest, the girl hadn't expected that. Her aunt was showing fabrics. She was genuinely happy. She was allowed to sew for the castle. Either this was how her awkward conviction worked, or the Marquis had planned to do everything this way from the start. Of course, she personally hasn't been given the chance to do anything yet. But the Lord has acknowledged that her presence in the tower will be useful, and that's already good. The girl's footsteps echoed loudly in the silence of the corridor. It didn't seem like the Marquis wanted to take his words back. At least that's what Claire thought. She walked along the illuminated corridor. Floor vases with flowers created a cozy atmosphere. The girl decided to take a break while she had the chance. The old door creaked softly. Shadows danced on the walls. Claire froze, listening to the silence. The spacious room was immersed in darkness. The girl decided to stay here, in the library on the third floor. The bookshelves reached the ceiling. The smell of old volumes filled the air. The young lady lit the lamp and placed it on the table with a soft thud. Shadows danced across the bookshelves. Claire held a book in her hands. There were several other works on the massive table. The patterned floor was lost in the semi-darkness. Her hair shimmered in the dim light. The girl noted with joy that the books no longer smelled damp, thanks to the fact that she aired them out every time the weather was sunny. Having settled herself more comfortably in the chair, Claire threw a warm cape over her shoulders. The young lady decided to spend the rest of the evening reading a history book. The girl immersed herself in reading. The flame of the lamp cast soft reflections, creating a cozy atmosphere. The stories on the pages of the book came to life. The founder of the Ringen Empire was Nicholas Ringen. Together with his friend Nurbeck, he won many victories on the battlefield and accomplished many great deeds. He also united the continent Western Roman into a single empire. The man fell in love with a mysterious woman and made her his empress. Nicholas Ringen was beloved by the people of the empire until the very last day of his life. Claire dissolved into the magical narrative of the old book. The knights in heavy armor approached the castle. Darkness enveloped the forest path. Footsteps echoed off the trees. Fog spread across the ground. The Marquis raised his eyes and looked into the distance. One of the pointed windows in the tower was glowing. The night was enveloping everything around in shadows. The night broke the silence. The captain noticed that his friend and master was again looking at the fire burning in the window. The Lord noted his friend's observation. The duty of a Teutonic knight is to maintain order and serve his lord in everything. This is how the man explained his attention. Bolt noted that it would be better to keep an eye on the Lapis Mountains when he was gone. Some freaks were just waiting for spring, when the snow would melt. The knight froze. The captain spoke respectfully about the fact that this time the order would like to accompany the gentleman to the poison parade. The Marquis chuckled. He didn't understand why this was necessary. He asked Julian if he really wanted to destroy something in Poison. The knight's answer was stern. The man he wanted to tear apart most of all was living in good health in the castle of Langtheo, right in Poison. It was obvious to the Marquis that Julian would say the same to the Archduke. The Lord asked if the man would really ask the Lord to take him with him in this case. Those knights who followed Ringen the Great and served only members of the imperial dynasty were knights of the Teutonic Order. Every member of this order openly despised the current emperor and Archduke. The Marquis thought about it. He smiled sadly. How could a knight ask him, a general, to take him with him to Poison? Footsteps in heavy armor echoed off the trees. The Lord pondered the danger of this parade at the moment. Julian waited silently for him to continue. The men approached the tower. The parade could be dangerous, but not as dangerous as the fact that knights were there to eat the Archduke alive. Suddenly, the captain changed the subject. He said that rumors were already circulating in the streets, that the Lord was carrying all sorts of jewels to propose in Poison. The captain of the knights knew that the Marquis was a wise man, but still, he reminded Lord Geneva what a mean and cunning man the Archduke was. This wily nobleman will want to do everything possible to get his daughter into the Marquis's bed. So just in case, the Lord coldly interrupted the knight. He assured him that this would never happen. Therefore, he asked him not to bother him anymore. The men stood before the castle gates. Bolt touched the forged handle. He wondered if the knight really wanted to go inside with him. Maybe he thought that something inside this place could open the Marquis's belly or something like that. Julian was embarrassed. He answered negatively. The quiet click of armor broke the silence of the night. The knight respectfully placed his hand on his chest, saying goodbye. Darkness enveloped the silhouettes. The captain was sure that the Marquis was not the kind of person the Archduke could manipulate. He had met him face to face and knew what he was talking about. But the Marquis had never shown interest in women before, even on the battlefield. And yet suddenly he became interested in the girl in that tower. The captain wasn't sure that being intimate with this girl before going to Poison was a good idea. Or maybe it would add fuel to the fire of the Lord's desires. The door on the third floor let warm light into the semi-dark corridor. Silence enveloped the castle. The Marquis stood at the half-open door to the library. The Lord's gaze was fixed on the gap that had formed. The light fell on his pale face. The man watched. At first he thought the girl had come here out of curiosity, but it seemed she really could read. That was unexpected. Claire sat with her back to the door, bent over a book. The lamplight outlined her silhouette. The man entered silently without disturbing the silence. The Marquis crossed his arms over his chest. His figure stood frozen in the shadows. Claire did not notice his presence. She was completely immersed in her reading. The man remembered how the girl had asked what she would have to do if she ever desired her master. Her voice sounded in the Lord's memory. Hearing these words, the Marquis began to feel as if he understood what emotions he really felt for this girl. When he saw her, he felt displeasure. The man squeezed the young lady's hand tightly. Lord Geneve was the most respected man in the empire, but when he was with the girl, he felt like he was disturbing someone noble and respectable. The Marquis began to slowly approach Claire. He compared himself to some poor drunkard which he had become because of this girl. Lord Geneva suddenly grabbed the girl by the shoulders. Claire gasped in fear. The book fell from her hands. Pulling the confused girl to himself, the man realized that he was like a thug who knew he was drunk, but couldn't stop drinking strong alcohol. Claire realized who had so unceremoniously violated her privacy. She quietly exhaled an appeal to the gentleman. The man's face was close to hers. In the silence of the library, a sharp command to undress sounded. From these words, the girl felt as if thousands of sharp needles were piercing her skin. The young lady tried to stop Lord Geneva. With her fragile palm, the girl tried to push away the powerful figure of her master. Bolt thought of Claire as a pure and noble creature. He gently bit her graceful finger. The girl gasped softly from such an unusual action. The Lord looked at the flushed beauty lying on the marble floor of the library. He couldn't understand why he had felt guilty before. The girl's hair was scattered in disarray on the floor. She folded her arms across her chest. The man noticed that the disheveled look suited the young lady very well. The Marquis leaned over the girl. She froze in fear. There were tears in her eyes. He grinned. As he thought, her eyes looked like a precious stone. The man wondered what she would look like if she wore a precious stone on her thin, fair neck. He gently touched the girl's throat. The Lord's imagination immediately drew a girl standing in blue spring water, and she was wearing only a magnificent necklace of jewelry. The man complained that he was already feeling more satisfied. His gaze lingered on Claire's tender lips. The atmosphere between them was heating up. The young lady found herself on the floor among scattered books. Passion overwhelmed them. Books fell to the floor as their bodies intertwined in a heated kiss. The Marquis lost control. The girl's plea to stop dissolved in the semi-darkness of the library. The air filled with heavy breathing. The Lord didn't pay attention to the objects that fell on his muscular back. He was focused on one action. Books fell and strewn around them, and on them. The girl begged the Marquis to stop, tried to draw his attention to the falling manuscripts. The young lady began to whine. She was in great pain. Tears flowed from her beautiful eyes. The Marquis did not stop. He held the girl's face in his hands with authority. He continued kissing her. He advised her to simply accept it. Quick steps were heard in the corridor. The butler was in a hurry. He had been summoned by order of his master. The door to the room swung open. Jake asked the Marquis with concern in his voice what had happened. Claire huddled on the edge of the bed, hiding from both men's gaze. The butler asked why the Marquis needed medicine in the middle of the night. The girl was shaking. The Lord reported that Claire had injured her ankle because of a book that had fallen. He ordered the butler to examine the young lady. Jake quickly approached the girl. He suggested trying to lower his leg. He touched the girl's leg. The ankle looked red and swollen. After a thorough examination, the butler concluded that the young lady had a damaged bone. He was ready to immediately provide first aid to the victim, but he would need to examine the girl again in the morning. After these words, the Lord frowned. The butler recommended that Claire avoid exertion for a while. The best option would be for her not to walk for a while. The girl felt awkward. Jake bandaged his swollen ankle. Seeing the girl's condition, the man understood the reason for the night call. Anxiety for the master was replaced by bitter understanding. Claire was in a lot of pain. Jake suspected that the book that caused the injury was very heavy. No wonder, because the girl was so fragile. Looking up at the young lady, the butler pondered the reasons why the girl visited the library on the 3rd floor so often. The Heirs Tower was built by Lord Newburgh for his son. This library contained complex historical and theological books. More books should be written in Frankish, which was the language used by most nobles, or in Latin and Swedish. The butler could not understand why this person was so often in such a library. The master ordered the butler to leave if he was finished. This brought Jake out of his stupor. He shuddered and rose from his knees. The door creaked shut behind the man. He had warned her that he would come to visit the girl in the morning. Claire swallowed nervously. The girl cowered on the edge of the bed. She clenched her hands into fists. She wanted only one thing, for the Marquis to leave. Tears flowed down the young lady's cheeks. The Marquis threw cold, angry words about her stupidity. Lord Geneva folded his arms across his chest. He said as if mockingly, if it hurt her so much, then she should have bitten him to stop. The girl raised her head in displeasure. She admitted that the Marquis had not allowed her to do this. The man suddenly came closer. He asked if the girl really needed to be told where to bite a man so that he would pay attention to her words. Claire turned away from the man. She gratefully refused such a dubious offer. Tears streamed down her face. The young woman especially understood that there was no point in her resisting at that moment. The man did not move from his place when all those books fell on him. The Lord had ignored her when she had begged him to stop. So why was he pretending to care now? The girl tugged at the hem of her dress. The young lady was shaking with pain. The suffering was becoming stronger and stronger. It went dark before her eyes. Claire felt sick. She couldn't stand the pain. She quietly asked the Marquis for forgiveness for not being able to serve him that evening. The man was very surprised by such words. He clarified what the girl had said. Claire asked to let her rest. The voice was weak and exhausted. Pain pierced every cell of her exhausted body. Consciousness began to slip away. The girl slowly sank into the saving darkness. Through the fog of unconsciousness, Claire heard the Marquis calling her name. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She silently begged the noisy bastard to leave her alone. In the darkness, shadows slid along the walls of the bedroom. Claire tossed and turned on the white sheets, surrounded by disturbing sounds. Every rustle made her flinch. The girl huddled on the bed. When she was little, a demon visited her every night. The little girl was shaking. There was despondency and desolation around her. The tempter was whispering that she needed to close her eyes and not think about anything. Just think about how her heart was squeezed like soft bread in a cozy home. And then her parents, whom she missed so much, would be hers. The little girl was alone in a cold room where no one ever came to visit her. The barred windows barely let in any light. The little girl prayed desperately for the sun to rise and for the demonic whispers in her head to stop. Claire was delirious. It seemed to her that it was all happening to her again. The girl's hair was scattered across the pillow in unruly waves. She heard whispers that even if she survived, there was nothing she could do. They advised her to give up her life. There was no point in resisting. In the semi-darkness of the huge room, Claire was tossing and turning in delirium. Her whispers were fading into the air. Her tortured consciousness begged for peace, but the shadows continued their dance. The man stood frozen by the bed, watching her suffering. A quiet whisper barely reached his ears. In the darkness of the room, the girl's plea disappeared without an answer. The Marquis gently ran his hand through her hair. He quietly promised that everything would be fine. He asked her not to worry. The Lord stroked the girl's head. Through the veil of oblivion, she felt a warm hand. Darkness enveloped the room like a thick blanket. Claire was breathing heavily. Her burning body was thrashing about on the sheets. Her skin was on fire. The air in the room was getting heavier. The man carefully lifted the girl's limp body into his arms. He realized that she was all sweaty. The Marquis remembered a recent conversation. That's why the young lady said she couldn't serve him in such a state. Lord Geneva had met many women who said ridiculous things. This girl was just as annoying. He pulled Claire closer to him. I guessed how it all started. The brave and respected Marquis Morinheitz made a mistake because he couldn't keep it inside himself. War is a primitive thing. So without hesitation, the Marquis showed his true self. And when he returned to the castle, he could not accept what was happening peaceful life. And over time, he became more and more bored. This is probably why, once his bloodthirsty nature was awakened, he lost control. And eventually revealed his vile lust. He even came up with an excuse for himself that his behavior was normal. Since Claire was a girl from the lower classes, the Marquis's gaze slid over the young lady's pale face. He could not understand why the girl had shown such impudence. The man exhaled heavily. If Claire had only asked for forgiveness, he would have shown mercy, like the Marquis of Morinheitz. The Lord laid the girl on the bed, white bandages tightly wrapped around the injured ankle. The Lord thought that this injury must have been severe for her. Claire groaned. The Lord went to the table by the bed. He noticed to himself that the girl looked funny when she endured this pain, but it didn't irritate him. The man took a glass of water from the table. The girl on the bed did not move. It seemed he needed to be kinder to her. The Marquis did not know that he could be so cruel. The Lord took a mouthful of water, and lifting the girl, he pressed his lips to her mouth. He tried to give her something to drink. The girl opened her lips with difficulty. She took a few sips. Drops of water ran down her face. The man carefully touched the lips of the young lady. Suddenly, the girl grabbed him by the neck and pulled him towards her. The Marquis shuddered in surprise. Claire touched the man's shoulder. Shaking and stuttering, she admitted that she was cold. The Marquis pressed the girl's fragile body to himself. His whisper promised healing. The warmth of his embrace enveloped her exhausted body. Finally, the girl warmed up in a strong male embrace. Through the veil of oblivion, Claire heard her name in his whisper. Voledor Castle in Poison rose against the morning sky, its sharp blue spires piercing the clouds, its many windows reflecting the bright sunlight. Archduke Edwin demanded a report from his servant when the people planned to leave the Margraviate. He was expensively dressed. Jewelry sparkled on his fingers. The man slammed his fist down on the table. He asked the servant about the guests' intentions to skip the banquet. He wanted to clarify whether this was true. The servant made excuses. The visitors were already hurrying to Langteo. He respectfully expressed confidence that they would soon find out everything. The Archduke chuckled. On the table in front of the nobleman were boxes and chests with various decorations. He reproached the servant. He had been saying the same thing for several days. The man did not understand how the campaign to the Archduchy could be postponed. He thought that the young lord was as impudent as his father. Archduke Edwin clenched his fist in anger. If only he had a son, he wouldn't have to humiliate himself like this. Everyone else had sons with ease. So why did he and his brother have so many problems? The servant swallowed nervously under his master's heavy gaze. He reminded that His Highness had a daughter. The man discussed the advantages of having at least a useless daughter over his brother's lack of heirs. But because of her, he had to jump through all these hoops just to marry Martel's precious son. The servant outlined the advantages of marrying Newburgh's grandson. He mentioned the possibility of ruling not only this empire, but also other neighboring kingdoms. The Archduke laughed mirthlessly. This trouble could have been avoided if Bolt had not been given such an important title by the Margraves. Edwin's father was nice to everyone in life. Everyone, of course, except his mother and them, his sons. The Emperor was a hopeless romantic. The Archduke asked the servant about the Marquise's girl. He had not heard anything about the lord. He was worried that the boy might be powerless, like his brother. A servant mentioned a widow in Bolt's household. The Archduke considered this person a minor obstacle to his marriage with Brodie. As long as they could have a child. A shudder of horror ran through the Archduke's body. He remembered the terrible curse. They threatened to end the bloodline. Revenge was promised even after death. His Highness was confident that Brodie would be able to seduce Lord Geneva herself. After all, his daughter was known as the greatest beauty in the empire. Rain and wind raged outside, enveloping the tower in a dark shroud. Heavy icy drops smashed against the stone walls, flowed down the ancient masonry. Claire extended her hand out of the window with delight. Cold drops fell on her palm. They brought with them the fresh scent of rain-soaked wood. The girl lingered by the open window. She wanted to enjoy this fresh air a little longer, but suddenly she was interrupted. Footsteps echoed loudly throughout the room. A stern female voice called out to Claire, inconveniently interrupting her solitude. An elderly woman in a uniform held a tray. Her voice was firm. She ordered him to return to bed immediately. Claire was not allowed to go out in the cold. The girl dared to object to Mrs. Ravia, but the woman warned that the cold wind was harmful to those with broken bones. She abruptly drew the curtains. The old woman closed her eyes in displeasure. She muttered that the girl was so thin that she had to worry about many things. The young lady looked at her bandaged leg. She noted that Mrs. Ravia had been appointed by the Marquis to take care of the girl. A couple of days ago, the Marquis gave the butler 2 weeks so that the girl could walk again. Claire sat on the bed. Lord Geneva gave orders to his butler that everything be done without reservations or objections. Jake agreed. The girl noticed how the butler's expression darkened after these words. It was unclear how the Marquise could claim that such an injury would heal in less than a month. Jake reminded her that it would be difficult for Lady Claire to be alone during this period. He asked what should be done in this case. The Marquis looked at the girl in silence. He studied her face. His gaze remained inscrutable as he pondered the situation. Bolt made a decision. He ordered the butler to invite Ravia. The man asked if the gentleman really meant Mrs. Ravia, and received confirmation. Claire watched the men with confusion. She looked from one to the other. She was very curious about who this Mrs. Ravia was. The girl would never have thought that this woman had been the Marquise's nanny in childhood. The lady immediately began to educate Claire, reminded her to keep her back straight. She pulled the girl's leg, examined it, noticed that at this rate the young lady would soon break another bone. The woman stroked Claire's cheek. The old woman could not believe that the girl serving the young master was so tiny. The nanny's hand gently touched Claire's porcelain face. The girl noticed that Mrs. Ravia treated her very tenderly, like a feather. She fed her. She took care of her. She brought her fruit and meat to bed, and she even tried to help her bathe. She was worried that the girl might fall in the bath. The woman held a spoon in her hands. In front of her, on her knees, was a tray with a plate. She insisted that Claire try the soup while it was still warm. The young lady understood that thanks to this woman she lived in luxury. Suddenly, the woman was interested in how Claire tolerated the Marquis in such a state. The nanny decided that the girl needed to quickly put some meat on her bones. Unfortunately, Claire had to listen to such revelations. The old maid's persistence reminded the girl of Aunt Gelda. That was probably why the young lady did not feel uncomfortable around her. Claire thought of her dear relative. She hadn't seen the woman since she injured her leg. The girl carefully asked Mrs. Ravia how she got to the castle. Did she by chance meet children on the way? The woman noted her charge's impatience. She suggested that they eat first. Claire tried to object. She missed her family. She remembered their fun games and amusements. The girl had never been separated from her children for so long. She was sure that they all missed her terribly too. Claire tried the dish in front of her. The spoon froze in her mouth. Her eyes sparkled with joy. The young lady admitted that the dish tasted like what her beloved Aunt Gelda used to cook. The lady confirmed that she had dropped by to give her aunt some meat, and she asked to bring Claire this dish. She noted that Gelda was a very good cook. According to the maids, Gilda was also good at sewing and washing. I couldn't imagine how they still worked. They were both so thin. Claire interrupted the old lady. She was concerned about how the children were doing. The woman reported that they were fine. Claire didn't have to worry about that. Apparently, Finn went up the mountain to collect firewood with other children. The boy admitted that the cook rewarded him with pies for this. Claire laughed merrily. She closed her eyes, imagining this fidget. Mrs. Ravia interrupted her. She continued questioning her charge. Her next question caught the girl off guard. She shuddered in surprise. The nanny was interested in why Claire pretended to be a mother to other people's children. The girl pondered Mrs. Ravia's question. She remembered her recent conversation with the butler. His information now took on a new meaning. The stern woman moved away from the department. But before, she was the only person who could give orders to the Marquis. Claire felt quite comfortable around her. Mrs. Ravia worked for the Marquis. The young lady was sure that the woman reported to the Lord everything she said and did. Claire felt that the Marquis had not only put her in this prison without bars, but had also assigned this woman to watch her. The young lady thought. Was there really a possibility that the Marquis was more obsessed with her than the girl had initially thought? The Marquis sat at his desk in his spacious office. He studied papers. Several men stood opposite. One of those present began his report. The Lord received information that Pison's merchant ship had been attacked by pirates. The young lord thought about it. The speaker thought the Archduke would ask Lord Geneva to resolve the problem first. There were whispers behind him. The Marquis rose from his desk. His chair creaked in the silence of the office. The master had ordered someone to be sent secretly to the Jurassic Sea. Without a doubt, the leader of the pirates must be very capable. It is necessary to order everyone who will participate in this to find out how their forces are structured. The Marquis stared thoughtfully out the window. The man was interested in how such a leader had appeared so suddenly. The Lord was going to exclude the Teutonic Knights from his campaign. Then his only assistant was his second son, Max, which was worrying. Even a lion can find it difficult to survive in a cave full of poisonous snakes. Geneva's only weakness was that most of its vassals were knights. To solve this problem, a university was built. But the situation was unstable because the person responsible for this project, Baron Kientz, was unwell. The informant admitted that if the Baron went down, his younger brother Jake would have to take over. They couldn't send him to spy on the pirates. The Marquis stood silently at the window. He watched the tower. The windows glowed softly, drawing the eye. The speaker tried to understand what the Lord was thinking about at that moment. Claire moved stealthily through the deserted corridors of the tower, her uncertain steps echoing in the darkness. She leaned against the cold stone walls. The girl stopped and exhaled sharply. She smiled. It seemed to her that she could still hear Mrs. Ravia swearing. The old lady couldn't contain her anger. She spoke rudely about Claire's brother. The girl never expected that the nanny would be so angry when she found out about Undine. By telling her story, the young lady had gained the lady's sympathy. In order to see her aunt, the girl needed to gain Mrs. Ravia's understanding. Moonlight streamed through the high windows of the tower. Claire looked up thoughtfully. She realized that the Marquise had not visited her since that night. Somehow the memories of that day became clearer as time went on. The girl had not felt that initial intense pain for a long time. She understood that it had disappeared at some point that night. When Claire realized that the Marquis had been comforting her all night with his warm hands, she experienced something that had never been known before. This feeling was almost enough for the girl to relieve the pain in her leg. Claire was torn between conflicting emotions. She admitted that she felt disappointed that the Marquis had stopped coming to see her. Suddenly, Claire gasped. She shook her head from side to side. She needed to get a grip on herself. It must have been the pain that was affecting her. Claire convinced herself that such dependence on her master would soon pass. Her confidence was as fragile as the moonlight filtering through the stained glass of the tower. Claire slowly climbed the tower stairs, each step a struggle as she held onto the wall and continued her climb. She noted that this was only the third floor. It was quite difficult for the girl to climb these steps, but still the young lady couldn't give up books, especially when she felt lost. Just like now, Claire reflected on her conflicting feelings for the man who had hurt her. Perhaps the loneliness of the tower had distorted her perception of reality. Our heroine moved forward slowly but surely. She was breathing heavily, but now this was her only goal. Suddenly, the girl lost her balance. Her hand lost its support. Claire screamed in fear. Strong male hands caught her and prevented her from falling. She found herself in the arms of the Marquis. The girl froze in fear. The man looked at her attentively. Claire was surprised by this meeting. The Lord smirked and noted that the girl had gained a little weight. Her mouth dropped open in surprise at such words. The Marquis carried Claire in his arms as they walked down the corridor. After several days of absence, his unexpected words made the girl plunge into thought. The man entered the library. He put her on her feet. The girl was delighted with what she saw. Her eyes were shining brightly. The room was in perfect order. Now everything was tidied up. The books were arranged in neat rows on the shelves. The tables were neatly arranged. Claire looked back at the Marquis with gratitude. He handed her an ancient volume. The expensive cover caught the girl's attention. The girl recognized it as the same history book she had read earlier. She wondered if the man had given it to her because he remembered. Claire began to turn the pages. Interest appeared in her eyes. The man stood at a distance. He folded his arms across his chest. He watched the girl attentively. The young lady shuddered at the unexpected question. She tore her gaze away from the book. The Marquis was interested in who had taught the girl to read. With sadness, Claire realized the true cost of her stay in the library. The Marquis had his own agenda, and his help was not an act of kindness. The bitter truth of this realization echoed in her thoughts. Thus, the Lord wanted to ask her something. The girl stuttered and said that she had taught herself to read. Moonlight entered the library through a large arched window. The man did not believe such an answer. The girl said that she cleaned the library of the man she served. And naturally, the letters became familiar to her. The Marquis frowned sternly. Displeasure appeared on his face. Did he really look so stupid that he could believe it? The man asked whether it was really possible for a simple maid to learn Latin simply by visiting the library. The Lord didn't know how to treat her words. He wanted to understand. Was the girl arrogant or stupid? This woman had climbed the stairs despite her injured ankle, just to read a history book. He wondered why she had done that. Claire confessed that she had been imprisoned. Her mother had died after giving birth to her, and the child had been abandoned in the old library. The memories weighed heavily on Claire. The young lady explained that after living there alone for several years, she had learned to read. The Marquis asked the reason why her mother died. Claire confessed that her mother tried to escape from a man who was threatening her. He was the son of the master whom the woman served. The girl heard that her mother had thrown herself into the river Kria. The Marquis noted what a tragedy it was. The young people stood opposite each other. Claire held an expensive copy of the book in her hands. The girl's eyes were dry. Bolt was amazed that the young woman did not shed a single tear. Her soul must have become numb from these endless misfortunes, just as his had become deaf to death after so many battlefields. He asked if Latin was the only language the girl could read. Claire admitted that she could also read Frankish and Svergen. As he left the library, the man said that if the girl wanted to read anything, she should let him know. Claire asked what the Marquis meant. Lord Geneve admitted that if the girl asked Ravia for books, the nanny would treat her like the plague. He handed the book to the girl. Claire didn't know how to react. She stared at the man without blinking. The Marquis wondered if the girl wasn't a fan of theological books. The girl looked at Bolt doubtfully. She objected that it was not so. She was surprised that the man allowed her to read. The Marquis grinned. The girl had been wandering freely around this place for a long time. So why was she asking his permission now? Claire reported that scribes were quite rare. Therefore, books were considered more valuable than jewelry. The girl imagined the unimaginable value of books. The girl couldn't believe that the Lord gave her his permission so easily. She was truly very surprised. The young lady put the book on the table. The Marquis asked how she was getting on with her nanny. Claire admitted that Mrs. Ravia had treated her well. The Lord took the girl by the chin. He looked into her eyes intently. He could definitely tell that the old lady had taken good care of Claire. He asked, without letting go of her face, if the girl would like the nanny to stay with her. If she agreed, then the Lord could do it. Claire shook her head. It wasn't that she didn't like the nanny, but the Marquis waited for more. Claire said resignedly that she was sure that Bolt had ordered Mrs. Ravia to follow her. The Marquis repeated the words about surveillance. Bolt asked why he needed it. Was it to keep the girl from running away? Claire just nodded in response. The Marquis noted with satisfaction the correctness of his assumptions. He knew it. This woman was definitely arrogant. The man was puzzled. Why would he, Bolt Mohrenheist, follow a woman with a broken leg for fear she would run away? She was already his anyway. He arrogantly said that the girl slept with him to pay off her debt. So why should he waste his time following her? And even if Claire escapes, all he has to do is make a decision. Kill her with one blow or tear her to pieces. The girl shuddered at these confessions. She blushed. The Marquis turned his attention to the book open on the table. On one of the pages was a picture of a stately man in a uniform. Lord Geneva mockingly noted that the girl preferred gray hair. The Marquis was indignant at the Svergen's disdain for Emperor Ringen, whose incomparable beauty and golden hair had become a legend among the nobility. This meant that the Emperor did indeed have light golden hair, which Bolt confirmed, noting the lack of such a feature in the current ruler. Claire asked if the Emperor had seen Ringen with his own eyes. A blush colored her cheeks at the mention of the possibility of such an acquaintance. The Marquis confirmed that he had seen it, although he was too young to remember. However, there was a portrait that captured his image in the Hall of Voledor. Bolt dropped the book, causing Claire to jump in surprise. His question about her desire to see the portrait hung in the air of the library. The Marquis pulled the girl to him, demanding a plea from her. He wanted to hear her promise to do anything in exchange for the opportunity to see what she wanted. The man kissed Claire passionately on the lips, offering her a simple choice between learning Latin and satisfying his desires.